Hey all, today I'm going to talk about how to build a fire. Some reasons you might want to do this is, anything from wanting to save your life to just, spicing up a camping trip or a nice time out in your backyard with friends. So what I'm going to talk about is preparation before we actually go about building the fire. Then we'll talk about the three pieces to the fire triangle: heat, fuel, and oxygen. Starting off, before we build that fire, we need to take some things into account. First off, do we have the materials that we need to build a fire? If you're thinking like a barren sand dune desert or a tundra, or your backyard doesn't have any wood, you need to find some materials that you have to build that fire. So find a source of fuel first off. Make sure you have enough fuel for what you need. Are you planning to cook on this fire, have s'mores, or just build a little light and heat to enjoy the evening? So finding that fuel. Next, we need to be able to make sure that fuel stays dry. So as we're prepping this fuel, we may need to break it down into manageable pieces to get that fire lit. Do we have the ability to keep it dry? So if it's raining or snowing or the ground is wet, we may need to protect it from the ground or protect it from the air. This could be finding a nice big pine tree to sit under and break up that fuel, or laying out some sticks or a tarp or something to keep it off the ground. Or maybe we go into our garage and we prep the fire there, and then we come out and light it in the backyard. Lastly, we just want to make sure that the area is safe for that fire. So is the ground flammable? Are there dry grass, leaves, things of that nature that might spark a wildfire? Is there something overhead? Is there fire code in the neighborhood? Just make sure that the area is safe, and that if we are building this fire, we can control it and we can use it for what we want, and that it won't get out of hand. Once you've got all these things ready, you can start thinking about actually lighting this fire. So we're going to move into the fire triangle, or the fire tetrahedron. The fire triangle is heat, fuel, and oxygen. Some people, a lot of firefighters, will add the tetrahedron, which is the chemical reaction. I don't really like to do that, because if you have sufficient heat, fuel, and oxygen, you will get fire. That chemical reaction is going to happen. So the three things we need. First off, fuel. So you can burn a lot of stuff. Tire, couches, all burn. I would not recommend it. So what we're going to focus on is just wood. Whether this is some spare wood we had from a shop, or we cut down a dead tree. We'd like this wood to be dry. So if it's rotten, we don't want to use that. And if it's a live tree, let that grow. When it dies naturally, we can use that for fuel later. Generally, a dead standing tree is our best bet. We can cut this down. It should be dry, and it should be nice and easy to split up for our fire. So we're going to break our fuel down into three stages. We have our tinder, our kindling, and our actual sustainable fuel. So starting off with tinder, we can use that wood, say we cut down a tree, or one of my favorites is take a cotton ball and some regular Vaseline. I raid my wife's stuff. You may have to go to the drugstore, wherever you get that stuff. Take that cotton ball, get it nice and impregnated with the Vaseline, pull it apart so it is still fibrous, and then you can light that very easily. If you don't have that, you can use Wet Fire tablets is a name brand. There's a trioxane tablet, which is like a powdered alcohol. All these things are good. Regardless, from our tinder, we need it to be dry, and we need to easily take a match or a spark, or however we're going to heat it. So that's the first step. Next, we have kindling. The kindling kind of break down into varying sizes, starting off smaller, thinking like pencil size. Thinking sticks or split up wood, pencil size, about a foot long. Next, we're going to move on to like a thumb size, and we want to build up, because our flame, if you've ever tried to light like a 2x4 on fire, it doesn't work. So we've got that tinder lit, then we're going to the pencil size, we throw that on. As the flame grows, we go to thumb, and then we can go to our larger fuel. This can be anywhere from wrist to upper arm size, however big, depends on how much fuel you have and how much time you have for this fire. So that's our fuel. Once you have that fuel set up, prepped out, we want to add heat, find some way to make it hot, and that's going to go to our heat part of that fire triangle. I'm going to break this down into two different categories. We have dedicated and improvised. Dedicated is kind of what you think. Matches, a lighter, or a ferro rod, a metal match is what they might be called. With any of these, we want to keep in mind that heat goes up. So we want to light from the base. So if we're using a match, strike that match. I like to hold it kind of down at an angle, and then I can set it around my tinder. I can use a lighter for this, or a ferro rod, some sort of sparking device. You want to spark into the center at the base, so that heat will go up. and it's conducive to the flow of the heat to light your tinder most effectively. Our improvised types of heat could be friction. So you think classic like the bow and drill. It's very difficult to actually do. I'm not going to go into it. But using friction, wood on wood will create fire. Some better improvised items would be something like sunlight. So using a magnifying glass, or you could use electricity. You might think steel wool and a 9-volt battery. That does work. The one I like, I think it's a lot more common, is a AA battery and a foil gum wrapper. So what you want to do is you want to fold the metal at the middle, kind of inside. So you have metal on one side, and we're going to curve it around that AA. So the metal touches, and then that wax paper is on the outside. When it contacts, that metal shorts out the battery, which heats up the metal enough to light the paper on fire. You have to be good because you only get about 10 seconds of flame. But if you do that right next to your tinder, it is a very effective method for starting a fire. Lastly, I'm going to talk about oxygen. Now, if you're in a position where you don't have oxygen, so you're either in space or you're underwater, fire is not something you need to worry about. So what we're thinking about is either too much wind or not enough airflow to that fire. So if it's windy, really any wind that's going to flicker a flame of a match could put it out. We want to build some sort of windshield. Generally, you want to do this in kind of a V, or again, if we're doing this in our backyard, go up against the side of your house, not too close, to get your fire started so that blocks the wind. You may also run into not enough air. So when we're actually building this fire, I like to use a platform and a brace. Platform's about 1 foot by 1 foot. You can use a piece of wood, you can use sticks, something to get it off the ground. The ground is usually wet, so that brace keeps it off the ground so that your tinder doesn't fall into wet soil and then extinguish. So we keep that off, and then we use a brace, generally about forearm size, and you can set the brace down and then have your tinder next to it, and then lay your kindling over top of the brace so that when you lay the kindling onto your tinder, it doesn't smother it. You can then also lift the brace slightly to get some airflow underneath if you need a little bit more airflow. So if your flame is just looking weak and sad, you can lift that, get some airflow in, and allow it to add oxygen to that fire. Blowing on it's generally not recommended. If the fire's got a bunch of coals and you're trying to reinvigorate it, you can. But a fresh flame, your breath creates a lot of moisture, so that fresh flame might get extinguished or at least not benefited by you blowing on it. Once you've done these 3 things, your fire is going, and hopefully it carries on, and you can just keep feeding that large fuel onto it for as long as you want, but you can sit back and enjoy it. And hopefully you've enjoyed this lesson. We talked about preparation for a fire, and then we talked about the fire triangle. We talked about heat, fuel, and oxygen. And now hopefully you can be warm wherever you go.